This is a response to Nick, the Modern Mystic, in your video. I can't remember what it was called now, but it was about pain and dinner parties, I think. I didn't really understand the dinner party analogy you were drawing there, Nick, so I'm going to just ignore that if that's alright. But the rest of it, I mean, you're basically saying that pain doesn't exist, which, of course, is a stupid thing to say, and because it's a stupid thing to say and you're not stupid, you're up to something with that. So I just want to spend some time with that for a minute. Because on the one hand, I know what you're talking about, I think, or at least I have an interpretation of what you're talking about. Pain certainly doesn't exist in the way that some other things exist. And I think that's worth thinking about. I don't want to talk about pain though, because that's too difficult, I think. So I want to just pick on colour instead. The colour blue, let's say. Does the colour blue exist? Because you can say exactly the same thing that you said about the colour blue, and colours have been talked about much more than pains. I think it goes back to Goethe, probably talking about colours not actually having an existence in the real world, whatever that means, but having some other kind of existence. They feature on the radar of human sensorium, but they're not part of any other instrumentation directly. You know, there are lots of things that correlate with the experience of the colour blue. Lots of things that correlate with that, and I can talk about those in a sec. But blueness itself is a phenomenological experience only. It only exists within that particular piece of apparatus we call the human central nervous system or something. Human experience. A lot of dogs out today. So anyway, yeah, so the blueness. So what about that? Well, obviously the fact that it does correlate to several things makes it a particular kind of thing. You know, look, I could certainly set up the conditions in which you and probably anybody else would experience the colour blue. I mean, that's pretty self-evident. If that wasn't the case, then paint companies, Dulux and Crown, would be out of business. You know, their whole bottom line is based on the fact that people have relatively common experiences, and those experiences can be predictably controlled for. So yeah, so it's certainly in terms of some conditions which correlate to an experience of blue, we could do that. Or I could kind of go the other direction and say that I can anticipate a correlate inside perhaps your head, inside your brain, which correlates with your experience of blue. And I'm pretty sure that test's already been done. You know, you can stick people in an fMRI scanner, identify which particular patterns of neurons are activated when the colour blue is experienced, and use that as a calibration for further experience. You know, you can look at future fMRI scans and say, oh yes, that person is experiencing the colour blue right now. And again, you can test it. You can test for it. But these are correlations. They're not, and they're kind of weird correlations too. And I think the weirdness is what you're getting at. Excuse me. And it's a weirdness about how these things relate to a wider set of information and wider knowledge. This is how I'm interpreting it. Because those set of conditions in the outside world that I can produce, and which pretty reliably produce an experience of the colour blue in a person who's in that environment, I can take those conditions and I can reduce them, I can break them down analytically. You know, I can talk about wavelengths of light, I can talk about the properties of the substances involved that are doing that, I can talk about reflectance and luminance, and I can talk about the chemistry of pigmentation, and I can talk, you know, I can do that, you know, and that's presumably what happens in the laboratories of paint companies. And that breaking it down, that analysing in terms of component parts, ultimately links up to a whole raft of information about chemistry and about physics and about optics. You know, very, very well organised and structured knowledge that links up to all other kinds of knowledge to do with, as I say, physics and chemistry and biology and optics and the hard sciences. And you know, the reason why blue pigment is blue, or rather the reason why a blue pigment reflects a certain wavelength of light, is for the same reasons that sunlight does what it does. It's for the same reason that a stick bends when you put it in water, or appears to be. It's set in motion with a whole set of other physical facts, which are entirely coherent. And the same thing with the fMRI scan. You know, yes, I can set the conditions up, and I can put you in an fMRI scanner. I can see the bit of the brain light up that corresponds to your experiencing of the colour blue, but I don't have to stop there. I can talk about how neurons work, I can talk about activation patterns, I can talk about how fMRI scanners work, I can talk about the electrochemical processes that are taking place and the chemistry of neurotransmitters. And again, this connects up to every other piece of knowledge to do with chemistry and physics and biology and the hard sciences. And again, that links ultimately to the same sets of ideas that colour links to. It's the same set of properties that are out there in the world. The raw building blocks of the universe link ultimately up to the workings of an fMRI scanner, the workings of the human brain, the workings of pigments and paints. You can't do the same, I don't think, at least right now, with phenomenological experience. The phenomenological experience of blueness in and of itself doesn't decompose in that way. You know, I can't reduce my experience to its component parts. I can correlate it with other things. I can say, yeah, clouds are blue and cornflowers are blue and my fingertips are blue and it's cold. I can make these kind of statements, but ultimately I can't link that. You know, I can't reduce my phenomenology to a set of component parts, and I certainly can't link it to anything outside of human experience, the experiencing of it. You know, experience is only in the experiencing of it. I can't do the physics thing. I can just draw correlations to the physics things. I can't identify the atoms of experience. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but that's what I'm getting out of what you're talking about. And as I said, that doesn't refute existence, of course, because I think when we talk about existence, we are working in two kind of registers. We are working across the phenomenological and of the empirical. Morning. That dog there is called Fred. When this lady calls her dog, I often find myself turning around. But we occasionally exchange dog stories in our walks. Anyhow, yes. Exists. When we say something exists, do it mean it exists phenomenologically, or does it exist empirically? And what's the relationship?